So 2023, in fact, can be regarded as one of the toughest years yet for South Africa. The country is battling a power crisis along with failures of other state-owned entities. With each interest rate high, consumers are struggling to keep a positive outlook. Business confidence also appears to be diminishing in the face of South Africa's confusing diplomacy stance with regards to this war in Russia. Now, Judith February is the executive officer at Freedom Under Law, and he joins us now to discuss these. She joins us now to discuss these issues further. Judith, thank you so much for making time. Good to see you. I don't know where to start. I just spoke to Sihle Zikalala, who's the Minister of Public Works, and maybe that's the perfect place to start. You may have seen the amounts of money that have been spent on refurbishing these homes that are occupied by ministers, and the Minister of Public Works says, well, we're going to sit with Cabinet because this is unacceptable. We've got to change how the system works. You would swear this is an administration that came into power just yesterday, that they didn't know even 4-5 years ago that this is unacceptable.
Hello, Clement. Thank you very much. Well, yes, it's just, I think, another example of what I called in my recent column in the Daily Maverick, a sort of a lack of self-awareness from this government, if one's being charitable, about the socioeconomic situation that the majority of South Africans find themselves in, and also the crises that we face. And so there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency really to deal with the real challenges of our country, and they are multiple. There's a cholera outbreak in Gauteng. We have the literacy study that's just come out, which shows that 81% of grade 4s can't read for meaning. And of course, on top of all of this, the electricity crisis, which brings about an economic crisis. But it's business as usual for this government and also for the president who heads it up. And so I'm not surprised at the tone-deaf sort of responses that you got from the minister. And actually refurbishment of homes is top of the priority list, because certainly matters of state don't seem to be, because otherwise we wouldn't be in the situations that we're in.
So where does this leave this government and its citizens? I mean, with all what South Africans are dealing with, you've mentioned load shedding, there's the scandal with the Russian vessel Lady R, you've mentioned the cholera outbreak. There's just so much going on, and government always wants to come up and, act as though we are in control and we're going to fix it. But you can't help but wonder whether that trust deficit is widening between government and its citizens. What do you think?
Well, it is, Clement, and also it's not just me saying that. If you look at successive surveys, for example, the Afrobarometer survey, you will see the trust in institutions is getting lower and lower, and certainly and trust in public representatives is diminishing. And this, of course, has real implications for the upcoming general election. We saw that in the local government elections, and particularly amongst young people, the sense of apathy and a sense of hopelessness, that the politics is so hopeless that they don't see that as the vehicle, organized politics, as the vehicle for change. What it leaves us with is a government that I think is unfit to govern. And, in the column that I wrote, I said that often we stop short of saying that the president, who seems to me, Clement, to be disinterested in the matters of state. I think his fealty is now completely to the party, the ANC, and he really seems to be somebody taking a hands-off role, and I'd be very surprised if he managed to stagger his way through a second term. But depending, of course, on what happens in the election. Well,
even if he decides it's time for him to go, you've got Gwena Mantashe who's going to say, nope, we are going forward, just like what happened a couple of months ago.
Exactly. And one wants to ask, though, what happened at Nasrec. One wants to ask why the president wants power and what he wants to do with it. That still seems to me to be unclear, and it's getting more and more opaque as the days go on. Just as I was getting onto this call, I saw a media release from the minister in the presidency, incompetence, saying that she was off to Russia tomorrow for 3 days, looking at the peacekeeping mission, but also at questions of international security, including food security. This is a minister within the presidency. Not a very good way to show our non-aligned stance. But also shows how very little control the president seems to have, A, on a narrative, and then B, on what really is happening within his government. And presumably he is comfortable with his minister, despite all the local crises, heading off into a country which is at war and which has invaded another sovereign country. It all makes very little sense, apart from in a warped ideological way. And unless, the theory is that the president is really at the behest of the party, as opposed to actually looking at what is in the best interests of society and citizens.
Yeah. Well, government could argue that, Newzroom is going to Russia. This is long planned. This is, what they told us with the chief of the army, who was also in Russia not so long ago. I'm not sure if he's back home. They told us, this was long planned. But if you look at the number of delegations or envoys, whatever you want to call it, that have been to Russia, the ANC sent its own delegation. Obed Bapela was part of them, who went to Russia. We had the chief of the army heading to Russia. We've got Newzroom Afrika now going to Russia in a very short space of time. This is not to say we must somehow undermine the relationship we have with this country. But the timing of it all, Judith, what do you make of it? And is it really clarifying things, or is it causing even more confusion as to where we actually stand?
I think it seems to me to be a kind of deliberate taunting of, whether it's the United States or any of the other Western allies, that, this is South Africa as part of BRICS, and we are going to align ourselves to Russia and to China. And that forms part of a rather bigger, more complicated conversation about global realignment. And many people more expert on foreign affairs than I am have written about it. Alec Russell this weekend in the Financial Times, but also William Shorkey in a very good and thoughtful piece on the Africa as a Country website on the historical alliances that the ANC has, but with the former Soviet Union, not with Russia as it is today. And that's where the ideological disconnect sort of comes in. But it seems to me a deliberate taunting. We saw the president talking to members of the ANC and people cheering him on, kind of cheered on by the rabble when he talked about our relationship with Russia. But this has economic consequences. Here we should be really cozying up to those with whom we have greater trade links, the European Union, the United States through AGOA and so on. But this government is intent on what the governor of the Reserve Bank called self-inflicted wounds. And we don't have the luxury of ideological flip-flops. This is a country in extreme crisis and an economy on its knees. And yet you have the ANC playing fast and loose. But it is the sort of thing that governments do when they're in trouble at home and they seek sort of a foreign affairs kind of forays. But this is a dangerous one. And President Ramaphosa should know better, one would have hoped.
Well, one would have thought he would have known better when he appointed the electricity minister and promised him some powers. He should have known that there was going to be, some opposition even within his government. He's now appointed this person to fix the energy crisis, but then the minister himself doesn't even have the powers that he needs to effectively deal with this issue of load shedding. And the president keeps saying, just wait. I am going to give him the powers that he needs. The same way he told us, just wait, I will appoint this electricity minister. Even when at his SONA address, he said, this is a priority. And what constitutes a priority?
I'm not sure, because the electricity minister is, as you say, without powers. Excuse the pun, but this is a country that does irony in spades. So, but he all he seems to do is, I've called him the minister of visitations, because every day on his Twitter feed he has, he's visiting Madupi, he's visiting Kusile, he's doing this. He's telling us what we already know in effect. But Clemens, I think the problem here is that you've created an office, you've created a ministry, and with all the expense and all the bells and whistles that come along with that. But what is this person actually meant to be doing? Now, here I think we have a leadership problem, again, at the feet of the president, because really what you have is bulls in a kraal, right? You've got Pravin Gordhan, you've got now the Minister of Electricity, Khotsiense Ramokgopa, and you have Gwedi Mantashe. We know that Gwedi Mantashe is the most powerful man in the room, even more powerful than the president, some might argue. So, but what you need there is you need a president who is a leader. And, leaders are not meant to be popular or liked. And I think if one was doing amateur psychology, you would say that there is some part of President Ramaphosa that seems to be to want the approval of his party more than anything. And so what a leader is called on to do in the best interests of the country is to transfer powers, to make decisions, to call these three men in a room and say, this is what needs to be done, and do it. We need to be doing far more with regard to renewables. I fear that we're all getting so desperate, Clement, that we are actually going to be pushed into car power ships with all the kickbacks and all the corruption that we know comes with these big tenders. And voila, our problem will be solved. And actually, that's not what we need. What we need is a just transition, which many people like Daniel Manele and the presidency have done lots of good work on. But it seems to fall on deaf ears, because you have one individual, Mantashe, who is addicted to coal, and one has to ask why that is. It's a rhetorical question. And so this is a leaderless sort of situation. So we can't blame the Minister of Electricity for going visiting, because he has nothing else to do. It's a travesty, because for every day that we lose, every hour we lose to load shedding, the economy bleeds. And I don't think that this government is taking this crisis seriously at all. Yeah.
Do you think there's empathy, though, from our leaders? I mean, you take, for instance, government's response to that court judgment on exempting state entities from load shedding. And I don't want to get into the technicalities of, in terms of processes, who is responsible for what. But, I mean, what does that kind of response reveal about who and what South Africans are dealing with here?
Clement, in my view, we're dealing with a government, and there's plenty of evidence to back that up, and not only the judgment that you mentioned. Because indeed, Pravin Gordhan might be right in saying that we can't provide electricity off the grid for all of these institutions. But it is the manner in which this is said and the manner within which it is done. Again, a lack of self-awareness, a lack of empathy, as you say, and a callousness. There's a callous disregard for life. There's a callous disregard for well-being. And in one of my columns, I did ask the question, at what point does this disregard by the president, the failure to protect our interests, and also the interests of the poorest and most marginalized in our society, at what point does that not become a breach of his constitutional duty to protect citizens and to act in the best interests of the Republic, which I don't think he is, and I think he's sorry Cabinet doesn't either. But, Clement, what kind of society is this where we seem comfortable with the majority of children who cannot read for meaning in any language, where we are comfortable, despite the president's reassurances when he took office, for children to still die in pit latrine toilets, where you have to have court orders to tell government to fulfill its socioeconomic obligations? This is not a government that is caring. It is not a government that protects the most vulnerable in our society. And a society in which an organization like Gift of the Givers is doing a lot of work which government should be doing, whether it's fixing pipelines, whether it's laying on water, all manner of things. it should hang its head in shame. Where people are dying of cholera in South Africa, 2023, and there are many, many more examples. So for me, I have said in this column, I think that this government is unfit. I think the president is unfit to govern. But we often stop short of saying that because we are concerned about the looming spectre that awaits us. Because what awaits us, further in the ANC or in coalition government is also a thought which should keep us up at night.
So we held ransom, in short. No, Judith, thank you.
Yeah. Well, Clement, I don't like to see the glass half empty, and I have, all of its cliches. This is a resilient country, and I have no doubt that we will remake our democracy. Yeah. But we are at a very low point at the moment, and it's going to take people to step up to the plate, and it's going to take business, civil society, citizens to speak up, and also to use our vote, to mobilize the youth vote, for example. But I think in the short term, we are in for a lot of pain because the factors, the socioeconomic strain is so great.
Got you. Judith February, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion.